The rain had no mercy that night. Seo Jiyeon sat in the back corner of the third-floor classroom, her red pen bleeding corrections across her practice exam. 97 points. Again, always 97. Never 100. Never first. First belonged to Park Soo-jin. It had always belonged to Soo-jin, the girl who slept 6 hours a night and still scored perfect marks, who answered questions before the teacher finished asking them, whose name sat at the very top of the ranking board like a throne no one else was allowed to touch. Students called her a genius. Teachers called her a gift. Parents whispered her name to their own children like a rebuke. Why can't you be more like Park Soo-jin? Jiyeon had been hearing that her whole life, in different mouths, in different rooms, from her mother, from her father, from the hollow space inside herself that never felt full, no matter how many hours she studied. She had filled 17 workbooks that semester alone. 17. She'd counted. The self-study session, Yaja, was supposed to end at 11, but tonight the storm had kept most students inside long past that. The corridors smelled like wet shoes and instant noodles from the convenience store down the street. Teachers had long since retreated to the faculty office, leaving the students to their silent, desperate ambitions. Jiyeon watched Soo-jin from across the room. Soo-jin wasn't even studying anymore. She was reading a novel. A novel. Thin paperback, soft cover, some literary thing with a flower on the spine. She was done. She was always done early, and she still won. Something behind Jiyeon's ribs tightened like a wire being wound too far when Soo-jin stood, stretched, and picked up her bag. Heading, Jiyeon guessed, to the rooftop to get air before the bus home. Jiyeon stood too. She told herself she just needed to breathe. She told herself it was only a coincidence that she followed. The rooftop door groaned as Jiyeon pushed through it. The rain had softened to a drizzle, the kind that floats rather than falls. Soo-jin was already at the railing, her back to the door, looking out at the city lights bleeding gold and red into the wet, black streets below. Jiyeon? Soo-jin turned, surprised, not frightened. She had no reason to be frightened of Jiyeon. Nobody did. That, somehow, was the worst part. You studied hard today, Soo-jin said pleasantly, because she was pleasant about everything. I saw your light on when I passed the window. I saw your light on. Like Jiyeon was something to be observed, something below the window, something noticed only in passing. The wire behind her ribs snapped. She didn't plan it. She wouldn't allow herself to call it a plan, not then, and not in the weeks that followed. It was one motion, one terrible, irreversible motion. Her palms flat against Soo-jin's shoulders, the soft sound of the novel hitting the rooftop tiles, the way Soo-jin's eyes went wide with an expression that wasn't even anger. It was confusion, pure, innocent confusion. Why? Then she was gone, swallowed by the dark below the railing. The silence that followed lasted less than 2 seconds. The sound it ended with lasted much longer in Jiyeon's memory. She gripped the railing with both hands and did not look down. She stood in the drizzle for a very long time. Then she picked up the novel with the flower on the cover, tucked it under her arm, and went back inside. The school ruled it a tragic accident. A student leaning too far over a wet railing in the dark. A terrible, heartbreaking accident. Park Soo-jin's name was taken down from the top of the ranking board. Seo Jiyeon's name went up. First place felt like wearing a coat that belonged to someone else. Jiyeon wore it anyway. The other students congratulated her carefully, the way you congratulate someone at a funeral, not sure what face to make, not sure if joy was appropriate. Some of them cried for Soo-jin in the first week. Then the weeks kept coming, as they always do, and the crying stopped. The ranking board stayed the same. Jiyeon studied harder than ever. She didn't know what else to do with herself. The hunger that had driven her for 3 years was gone, replaced by something formless and gray that she couldn't name. She stayed later, left later. The school at night became more familiar to her than her own bedroom. It was during one of those late nights, 3 weeks after the rooftop, the rain returned as if keeping an anniversary, that she first heard it. She was alone, the last student in the building, probably the last person on the floor. The fluorescent light above her desk was the only one still on in the classroom, casting everything beyond the doorway into pure dark. She had her head down, working through a mathematics problem, when the building settled into the specific quality of silence that only exists after midnight. And then from the far end of the hallway, thump. She lifted her head. A pause. 4 seconds. 5. Thump. She told herself it was a pipe. Old buildings groaned at night. Everyone knew that. She looked back down at her notebook. Thump. It was closer. She set her pen down. There was something wrong with the sound. She understood that immediately, in the animal part of her brain that exists below language and reason. She had heard footsteps her entire life, in hallways, on staircases, above her, on the ceiling of her childhood bedroom. She knew what feet sounded like. This wasn't feet. It was heavier than feet. It was wetter than feet. Each impact was slightly too long, slightly too resonant, like something dense and rounded, making full contact with the linoleum rather than the quick tap and release of a heel or a toe. Thump. And between each impact, a sound she couldn't immediately identify, a soft, dragging sound, like something being pulled. Thump. Drag. Thump. Drag. It was in the middle of the hallway now. She could tell by the volume, by the way the sound had grown from a distant knock to something that filled the air. Still slow, perfectly rhythmic, not hurrying. It knew where it was going. Jiyeon was out of her chair before she realized she'd moved. She looked wildly around the classroom for somewhere to go and found nothing. No closet, no back exit, only the desks and the blackboard and the 2 doors, front and back, both opening to the same hallway. She dropped to the floor and crawled under her desk, pulling her knees to her chest, pressing herself against the back wall. The thumping stopped. Silence. It was directly outside her door. She could feel it the way you feel a change in air pressure. She pressed her hand over her mouth and did not breathe. 1 minute passed. 2. The silence was so complete, she could hear the rain on the windows and the hum of her own blood. She counted to 60 twice before she moved. The thumping had stopped somewhere down the hall. She didn't know how far. She didn't know how long the silence had been holding. Then it started again. Thump. Drag. Thump. Drag. But different now. There was something new between the impacts, a sound she hadn't heard before. Hollow. Metallic. The groan of a hinge, the soft clap of a door swinging open, and then a pause. Silence pressed into a room, filling it, checking it. Then the door swung shut again. Thump. Drag. Thump. Drag. Moving on, she understood then, not searching blindly, methodically, 1 classroom at a time, working down the corridor toward the only light still burning on the 3rd floor. Here, a hinge groaned, Silence bloomed. A door closed. Here? Closer now. 2 rooms away, maybe 3. Jiyeon was already off her chair, already on her knees, crawling across the linoleum. She pressed herself beneath her desk in the back corner. The same corner she always sat in, the corner she had sat in for 3 years. The corner whose location Soo-jin had known because she had passed the window and seen Jiyeon's light on, night after night after night. I saw your light on. She pulled her knees to her chest and pressed her back against the wall and covered her mouth with both hands. Thump. Drag. 1 room away. The hinge groaned. A door opened. Silence. She heard it. The searching quality of it. The way the quiet pushed into every corner of the room next door, running along the walls like water finding cracks. Then the door closed. Here? The sound stopped directly outside her classroom. She stopped breathing. The door handle turned. The door opened. She heard the cold come in before she felt it. A damp, heavy cold that moved like something alive, rolling across the floor and rising over her shoes, her ankles, her knees. The fluorescent light above her desk hummed and flickered once. Thump! Inside the room now. The first impact on the linoleum was close enough that she felt it through the floor. A faint vibration traveling through her palms, through her knees. Thump. Drag. Moving between the rows of desks. Slow. Unhurried. The same perfect rhythm it had kept the entire length of the hallway because it was not searching anymore. It had opened every door. It had checked every room. It knew this was the last one. Thump. Very close. Jiyeon pressed herself as far into the corner as the wall allowed and made herself as small as she had ever been and kept both hands over her mouth and did not make a sound and did not move and did not look. The thumping stopped. Silence again. Complete. The rain on the windows. The hum of the light. The sound of her own pulse. Something was beside her desk. She felt it the way you feel a gaze on the back of your neck, a pressure, directional and specific, coming from below. She looked down. The face was at floor level, chin pointed upward, forehead against the linoleum, wet black hair pooling around it like spilled ink, the neck bent in the center, not where necks bend, but in the middle, sharply, wrongly, so that the face could tilt up from the floor and look directly at the girl crouched against the wall. One eye open, one eye not. The open one found hers immediately, without searching, without delay, as if it had always known exactly where to look. Park Soo-jin's dark lips moved. The sound that came out was barely a sound at all, pressed flat, almost gentle, the way you'd say something to someone sitting right beside you. Found you. The light went out. When the custodial staff opened the 3rd floor classroom the following morning, they found a single desk overturned, a notebook open to an unfinished mathematics problem, and a thin paperback novel near the back corner, its pale flower cover facing up, soft and still, as if someone had just set it down. The ranking board in the hallway was unchanged. At the top, in careful block letters, was a name. Park Soo-jin. It had always belonged to her.